How are you guys doing? Today is Tuesday, January 4th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile on Kris Bryant. The elite third baseman for the San Francisco Giants turns 30 today, and my intention with this episode is, of course, to point out where he is elite on the micro level when we talk about how his numbers have improved from season to season and how they separate him from every other player in the league. And of course, to take a step back and look at his macro impact on the league, considering the individual awards that he's won, when he won them, not to mention his impact on a franchise that hadn't won a World Series in over 100 years. If you're unfamiliar with Kris Bryant, he's a right-handed hitter. He's a pretty solid defender, but I guess he's more of an elite hitter, makes great contact, and at the same time, he is one of the reasons that he has been able to keep his team in games. But I think that Kris Bryant's impact, especially since he's been on the team, has been very consistent. I think he's fallen out of the public eye ever since he won that championship with Chicago ever so slightly. But I promise that his consistency as an MLB player from then until now has been continuous and has been a result of him being one of the best baseball players in the world. And of course, I always point out the fact that there's so many millions of people that are competing for very finite spots in the MLB. But to be a player that's won the MVP and to be named to the All-Star team 4 times is not like you're just good. He's one of the elite baseball players that walks this earth. So with that said, getting into his background, he was originally from Las Vegas, Nevada. Out of high school, he would go on to be recognized to the All-USA Baseball's first team. He would be taken in the 18th round of the 2010 baseball draft. So at the end, he ended up opting to go to college, and he went to go play baseball at the University of San Diego, where he established himself as one of the better college baseball players in the game. He would go on to be taken with the first overall pick of the 2013 MLB draft. He was taken second overall by the Cubs right after Mark Appel was taken by the Houston Astros. But of course, other players in that draft included Tim Anderson, who was taken with the 17th pick out of East Central Community College out of Mississippi. And Aaron Judge was taken with the 32nd pick in the compensatory round, just to give a sense of who else was taken in that round. Devin Williams was also taken in the second round, just to give a sense of who was in that draft. And Cody Bellinger was taken in the 4th round. So that's the 2013 MLB draft in a sense. But after the 2013 draft, he was a member of the Chicago Cubs up until last season. He would get officially called up for the Chicago Cubs in his age 23 season in 2015. In that season, he would go on to play 151 games in a season where the Cubs would finish with a 97-65 record. The Cubs had won 24 more games than they had won the previous season. They finished with the 3rd best record in the NL Central, but they would still qualify for the wild card game, and they would make it into the playoffs themselves. In the 151 games he played in his rookie season, Kris Bryant finished with 154 hits. That's 3 more hits than games played. He had 87 runs as a rookie, 31 doubles, 5 triples, which is the most triples he's had in a season. He hasn't had any more triples than his rookie year. He finished with 26 home runs, 99 RBIs. He'd also lead the league in strikeouts, as he had 199, but he's never had that many since. He would finish with a 275 batting average. His 369 on base percentage and 488 slugging percentage combined to an 858 on OPS. And he would finish with a 135 OPS plus as a rookie. At the conclusion of the year, in his very first season in the league, he was named an All-Star for the Cubs. He was named the Rookie of the Year in the National League. He would go on to finish 11th in MVP voting in the year where Bryce Harper would go on to take his first for the Washington Nationals. And then just looking at how that season fared after his very first season in the league, the Chicago Cubs would go on to win their wild card game as they beat the Pittsburgh Pirates that year. They would go on to beat them 4-0, as that's actually how the game went. They would go on to beat their division rivals, the St. Louis Cardinals, in the division series before getting swept by the Mets in the championship series. After the Mets swept them, they would end up losing in 5 to the Kansas City Royals. So that was the very first time that Kris Bryant would make the playoffs with the Cubs. And mind you, at this time, the last time the Cubs had won the World Series prior to this was 1908. So it was well over 100 years. So this would transition into Kris Bryant's second season. In his season following his rookie year, he would go on to play 155 games for a Chicago Cubs team in 2016. That would finish with a 103-58 record. They had won the NL Central as they had won 6 more games in the prior season. In just Kris Bryant's second season in the league, in his age 24 season, he would be named the MVP of the National League. He finished with 176 hits in those 155 games, which is 21 more hits than games played. He would lead the National League in runs as he had 121 of them. That is the most runs that Kris Bryant has ever scored in a season, even to date. He would go on to finish with 35 home runs, which is tied for the most doubles he's had in a season. He finished with 3 triples. He had 39 home runs and 102 RBIs, both for home runs and RBIs. Those would be career highs. He would finish with a 292 batting average, which would be 17 points higher than what he did the year before. He would finish with a 385 on-base percentage and a 554 slugging percentage. That his 554 slugging percentage is the highest slugging percentage he's ever had. His OPS would be at 939 if you added that up correctly. That's the second highest in his career. He would also go on to finish with 334 total bases, the most total bases he's had in a season, as his OPS plus was the highest it had ever been, 146, meaning that he was 46 points better than the average player when it came to OPS. And, of course, as the 2016 season would come to an end, he would, of course, be named the National League MVP, and he would be named an All-Star for the second year in a row. He would go on to win MVP with almost 200 more votes than Daniel Murphy for Washington, just to give a sense of what Kris Bryant was doing that season. And once the Cubs made it into the playoffs, they would go on to beat the Giants in the National League Division Series. They won that one 3-0. They would go on to beat the Dodgers in 6 in the National League Championship Series, as this was still in the midst of the Dodgers' National League West winning streak. They would go on to beat the Cleveland Indians in the World Series 4-3, after the Cleveland Indians would go on to take the lead prior to it. The Indians did take a 3-1 lead after Game 4. The Cubs would win their final 3 games. This was the season, I believe, that Ben Zobrist would win the MVP. But just taking a look at how Kris Bryant would fare in that World Series tournament, he would go on to finish with at least 2 home runs. He finished with 2 home runs and 2 RBIs in that World Series, as he did help the Chicago Cubs win their first World Series in over 100 years in the same season that he won the National League MVP. It's very rare when you see players win their season MVP and you see them win the World Series in the same year. Of course, he's not the only one to do so in recent memory, but the fact that he was able to accomplish both in one year, especially for a historic year for the Cubs, really is what brings it all together. And that was just his first 2 years in the league. Transitioning to his third season in baseball and to his career after he had won a championship. This transitions to his age 25 season in 2017, where he would go on to play 151 games for a Chicago Cubs team that finished with a 92-70 record. They had won 11 less games than they had in their championship winning season, yet they had still won the National League Central. In the 151 games he played, Kris Bryant finished with 162 hits, which is 11 more hits than games played. He had 111 runs, the second season in a row he finished with at least 100 runs on the season. He would finish with 38 doubles, which is the most doubles he's ever put together in a season. His 4 triples are the second most he would ever put up in a season. He finished with 29 home runs and 73 RBIs. His 29 home runs are the third most he's ever put up in a year. He would also go on to finish with a 295 batting average. This year, he would have an on-base percentage above 400, as his 409 OBP is the highest it's ever been. His 537 slugging percentage was the second highest of his career, but his OPS of 946 was the highest it had ever been in his MLB career. At the conclusion of the year, he would finish with a 142 OPS plus, and he would, even though he wouldn't be named an All-Star, he would finish 7th in an MVP voting season, where Giancarlo Stanton would end up taking home the MVP that season. And just taking a look at how the Cubs fared following that season, they would end up beating the Nationals in the National League Division Series before they ended up losing in the National League Championships Series to the LA Dodgers, who went all the way to the World Series just to lose to the Astros in 7. Later found out that the Astros cheated, but the Astros still got to keep the title. But that would transition into Kris Bryant's 4th season with the Chicago Cubs. In his age 26 season, he would play 102 games in a season where the Cubs would end up with a 95-68 record. They finished with the second best record in the National League, but he would also go on to play, or he would be placed on the disabled list for the first time in his MLB career because he had shoulder inflammation. He would miss about 60 games of the year, but in the 102 games he played, he finished with 106 hits. He had 4 more hits than games played, continuing that streak. He had 59 runs on the season. He had 28 doubles over that year. He would have been on pace to shatter his doubles numbers. He had 13 home runs and 52 RBIs. He finished with a 272 batting average, and in that season, he would finish with an 834 OPS. In his first 4 seasons, that would be the lowest he would ever put up. And he would do the best he could, even though he wouldn't help the Cubs in the playoffs. Once the Cubs made the playoffs, they would actually lose their National League wild card game to the Rockies, as the Rockies won that one 2-1 in the 13th inning. That's how that game finished. And following that season, Kris Bryant would, of course, return for what would be his 5th season with the team. In his age 27 season in 2019, he would go on to play 147 games in a season where the Cubs would finish with an 84-78 record. They finished 3rd in the National League Central as they had won 11 less games than the prior season. Kris Bryant would go on to be named an All-Star for the 3rd time in his first 5 years, as he had 153 hits in 147 games, continuing his 5-year streak of having more hits than games played. He finished with 108 runs. That would be the 3rd time in his MLB career he had at least 100. He would finish with 35 doubles. This would be the 4th time in his first 5 years he had at least 30, and his 3rd time he had at least 35. He would finish with 1 solo triple on the year. He had 31 home runs, which is the 2nd most home runs he's ever had in a season. And his 77 RBIs are the 3rd most RBIs he would put together in a season. He would finish with a 282 batting average, and his 382 on base percentage and a 521 slugging percentage would combine into a 903 OPS. This would be the 3rd time in his first 5 years he finished with an OPS above 900. He has not finished a season with an OPS above 900 since 2019, of course. And in 2019, like I said, he would be named an All-Star. This was the last, not the last time. This is the last full season in which he was named an All-Star with the Chicago Cubs. And they would fail to make the playoffs, but of course, Kris Bryant still would establish himself as one of the better players in the league. So this transitions into his 6th season with the Cubs, his age 28 season in 2020. And if you remember the 2020 MLB season, which is the first season that I covered, that is the season that had to get shortened by 100 games because of COVID, but they did expand the playoffs. He would go on to play 34 games in his age 28 season, in a year where the Chicago Cubs would go on to finish with a 34-26 record. They finished with the best record in the National League Central, so they would go on to qualify to play they qualify for the playoffs regardless, even though it was expanded. He finished with 27 hits in the 34 games he played, ending his streak at 5 for having seasons with more hits than games played. He would go on to finish with 5 doubles, a triple, 4 home runs, and 11 RBIs, as he finished with a career-low 206 batting average and a career-low 644 OPS, on base plus slugging, but of course it wouldn't be registered as a full year for him. And once the Chicago Cubs would go on to make the playoffs, despite Kris Bryant having to deal with this pandemic shortened season, the Cubs would end up losing in the National League Wild Card Series to the Miami Marlins. They ended up getting swept by the Marlins in those 2 games, and that is the last time that the Cubs have made the playoffs. This transitions into this most recent 2021 season, which is going into Kris Bryant's 7th season with the Chicago Cubs in his age 29 season. He played 93 games for the Chicago Cubs, but then he would eventually get moved to the San Francisco Giants. He got traded in exchange for prospects, Alexandria Canario and Caleb Killian. But looking at how he fared in the combined season, he would be named an all-star with the Chicago Cubs as he played 144 games in this last season. He had 136 hits, which is the second straight season in which he had less hits than games played. He was still finished with 86 runs. He had 32 doubles, making it his fifth season in which he's had at least 30 doubles in a year. He will go on to finish with a couple of triples. He had 25 home runs and 73 RBIs, pretty much on par with what he was doing before. He would finish with a 265 batting average, which for a full season is actually his career low. And he finished with an 835 OPS, which in a full season is his second career low. But out of the full season that he's played more than 102 games, this is the lowest OPS that he was able to post. But he would still be named an all-star for the fourth time in his first 7 years, which is a majority of the years that he's played. And he would go on to help lead the San Francisco Giants into the playoffs as the Giants finished the 2021 season with 107 wins. And then looking at how they fared, they would go into the National League Division Series and lose to the Dodgers, who had won the wild card going in. The Dodgers would end up losing to the Braves, who ended up winning the World Series over the Astros, and that's how this last 2021 season finished. And now it leads us to where we are now, as Kris Bryant is now entering his 30s in a sport that has seen a lot of players see a lot of success in their 30s, more success in their 30s, especially as contact hitters, especially as they become more experienced and start to see the game slow down a little bit. And I don't think that Kris Bryant is going to be an exception here. I think that considering he's shown his versatile skill set as a hitter up until now, and the fact that he can get a lot better now that he's in a very comfortable situation in San Francisco, I see this as a very favorable situation with him, and I look forward to seeing what he does over this next year. Once again, today is Tuesday, January 4th, 2022. First off, I want to thank the ESPN, the MLB, the Pro Baseball Reference websites, and of course the Wikipedia articles for giving me all I needed on this episode. If you ever get a chance to watch Kris Bryant, at this moment, he is a free agent. And I imagine he might re-sign with the San Francisco Giants, but it'll be very interesting to see what he does. But at this very moment, he's not officially on a team. But I do know that the team that picks him up next is going to be picking up a gem, and this man is going to get paid in this next contract. With that said, thanks for listening. I hope all is well. And once all of today's exhibitions and matchups are done, I'm going to come back tomorrow on January 5th for more. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with more tomorrow. Thanks for listening to my piece, and peace out.